Yeah, that's great. And I wanted probably to start off with you introducing yourself a little bit and probably telling us more what you do for Zcash, and that would be
hmm
great.
Sure. Um, so, starting from the beginning, I've been involved in Bitcoin probably from around 2013, just being introduced by friends. More so on like the libertarian side, libertarian friends. Interest in a different kind of money that isn't susceptible to inflation and various government dealings. And then at that time, I was in San Francisco and started getting involved in organizing San Francisco Bitcoin meetups. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then through that, I just got to meet um, many different people involved in the industry because San Francisco is where a lot of people, especially back in the day, tended to meet and do meetings, and a lot of the conferences were centered around there. And then just kind of through the grapevine and crypto Twitter, I met Zuko. Um, and in 2016, right before the launch of the Zcash cryptocurrency, it aligned that I was looking for a job, and the company was launching Zcash. So I had experience in doing kind of community and user education work. So that's something that they were interested in filling. And by the company, I mean the electric coin company. So.
Yeah, that's now Electric Coin Company. So you're more of an educator.
Yeah, I actually went to art school, and so it's kind of like a weird, but I'd also been interested in technology, so it's kind of like a weird mishmash of enjoying the like how to create metaphors so it's easy for like these complex technologies to be at least better understood at a high level rather than um, how deep they can get and how nerdy they can get, trying to bring that out and like just introduce people to basic concepts is what really uh, intrigued me the most.
Yeah, that's a great thing because I think that people need more awareness, people need more education, especially about cryptocurrency that can be, at some point, it can be easy, but also can be really complex. And
Yeah.
it's needed to bring this kind of information into the world. So that's great to know that you're actually the person who is doing that for Zcash. And so it's your background basically that brings you to Zcash team.
Yeah, and interest in privacy. I've kind of just, at least since the days where I started getting into these decentralized technologies. It kind of like coincided with having an interest in internet privacy and just having the basic um, understanding of why, for example, using a VPN is important and just like being able to protect yourself in a very fundamental way. So just having that in mind as well was another reason.
Like moving on to Zcash as a company and as a project, as such, you guys do a lot of focus on privacy. Of course, it's like one of the
Mm-hmm.
main things. So where does this major interest in privacy and this uh, Zcash being specialized basically in privacy, where does it exactly come from? From Bitcoin being like not private enough, from generally like other cryptocurrencies being not private enough? Is it some story behind it?
Yeah, so it it came out of the idea of Zcash came from a few different iterations. So a group of scientists they created a protocol called Zero Coin back in 2014, and they proposed that to the Bitcoin developers. And at that first initial protocol was very inefficient, and the Bitcoin developers kind of just you know as I've heard politely turned them away. And said that this wouldn't work to integrate because at that time Bitcoin was already relatively significant, and as Bitcoin developers are, they're more conservative in their approach to upgrades and changing the protocol and things like that.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
they weren't gonna integrate this kind of new complex experimental thing that was inefficient, and meeting that group of cryptographers kind of joined forces with another group of cryptographers that were researching a similar problem of privacy lack of privacy in Bitcoin and some of these other cryptocurrencies that were coming up, and they created an improved protocol called ZeroCash, which is with some minor changes is the protocol that Zcash is based off of. And those 7 scientists, we call them, that created the ZeroCash paper, they approached Zuko. Some of them knew him, and they approached Zuko as to see if he was interested in launching Zcash as a separate coin, because I think they also brought the ZeroCash paper back to the Bitcoin developers, but they still didn't want to make any significant changes. So,
No.
Their next step was just to kind of make this a new cryptocurrency and see what would happen there. And those 7 scientists are founders. They're technically founders of Zcash as well, and more or less advisors to the Electric Coin Company still to this day. So.
Also, in preparation for our interview, I was reading and researching a little bit on the previous interviews that were done with Zcash, and there was one particular one with Zuko that I watched and heard, and it was very interesting from the point of Zcash and Electric Coin Company. It's a lot of emphasis put on the company, like as a word as such. So does it mean that it's a little bit less decentralized, for example? Because this is the question that comes up pretty often. Like, if it's a company, then it's not exactly this sense of decentralization that we usually have in mind.
Yeah. So it's Zcash, the launch of Zcash, and even up until now, I feel like it does have kind of a unique position compared to other cryptocurrencies. This idea of a for-profit company being used to launch and kind of so what happened, the reason that the Electric Coin Company was able to kind of launch and sustain itself for the first little while, like before launch and everything, was getting traditional investments. So because it was a kind of standard startup model with traditional investments, there was the ability to pay engineers on a regular basis, and that's something that you can see as a tricky point for a lot of open source projects that don't have this for-profit company that is bootstrapping it. That said, from the start, there was always this plan to have a balancing of sorts. So there's actually 2 primary organizations in the ecosystem right now. The Electric Coin Company, obviously, which is still the primary maintainer of Zcash, but there's also the Zcash Foundation, which is a U.S. nonprofit, and that was established to provide this balance and stewardship of the protocol. They're at a much earlier stage in development, and but they've been growing significantly in the past year or so, and there's a lot of interest from the company doesn't want to be totally in control anyway. So there's a lot of discussions about how we can balance things best and keep the community in mind, so that if if one company or one organization isn't acting in the benefit of the community, then the other one can step in or do something about it. But so there is this. I think it was an interesting kind of experiment to see how to launch a cryptocurrency via a company that is well established and, you know, had a lot of advisements in the beginning, so it wasn't like sketchy or anything like you see with some other cryptocurrencies, perhaps. So there was a lot of legitimacy lended to the company in the beginning. So I think the fact that able to pay engineers, really expert engineers, a good salary and kind of running with that legitimacy was able to sustain it and allow this to grow into one of the top cryptocurrencies, and then also give space for the foundation to grow itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But actually, you mentioned that there are engineers, of course, who needed to be paid a decent salary. Like, how did the Zcash team get formed? The core team, probably.
Zuko has the best history of this, and he's done interviews on this, so I definitely recommend doing like other people hearing the story from his mouth. But so Zuko had another company which still exists called Least Authority, and he was the CEO of that company, and he had a handful of engineers already working for them, well, more than a handful, I should say, but a handful of them were interested in working on Zcash with him. So it was kind of like this segmentation of sorts where he handed Least Authority over to someone else to manage, while kind of taking a step back. He was still involved in a lot of while that kind of split was happening, he was still involved a lot with Least Authority, but over time he became primarily focused and then totally focused on Electric Coin Company, which back then was called Zcash Company. But
majority of the people basically kind of floated to Zcash Company from there. And
yeah, I don't know the number of people, but there's a couple people that I think wanted to stay at Least Authority, and then some people that wanted to go to Zcash, and then with some maybe spare funds, able to hire one more engineer for Zcash, and then that's where the investments came in to be able to hire more people.
Okay, so do you think that this is this interest in privacy and decentralization that mostly unites the team now?
Yeah, I would even say that it is an interest in decentralization. I think everyone in the company was intrigued by the introduction of Bitcoin, but they're also very much aligned in an understanding of the importance of privacy. In general, I wouldn't even say specifically with cryptocurrency, we're all pretty understanding of why privacy is kind of this fundamental thing. But obviously, finance and money is extremely important to be able to kind of control yourself and not.
Yeah, definitely. But besides the privacy, what other core values, probably the pillars of Zcash, could you name?
Well, okay, so I would say kind of a lot of things just fall in line with this concept of privacy. So you can think about it in different ways. There's this like personal aspect to privacy and like consensual aspect that just being able to control your own data, I think, is what drives a lot of people in the privacy community in general, and obviously everyone at Zcash, at the Electric Coin Company. And then especially in the early days, and I would still say so now for the team, that there's an interest in science and using science to be able to push new boundaries, taking time to do the research, and like putting emphasis on new cryptographic discoveries and really analyzing them, even if they're in early days. there's still a heavy interest, especially from the protocol engineers, in keeping this research side and science side in mind. And, other things that go along with privacy that might be more economically aligned, like fungibility and, things like that.
Okay, and from the point of development, like from the point of Zcash being established to up until now, what were the most major things that happened? Like you were talking last year, for example, a lot about sapling, a lot about some kind of like major updates that are going to show up in the nearest future, and the future is already here. So we would love to hear something about the development and how did it go historically, probably.
Sure. Well, sapling, I think, is kind of the keystone so far for improving Zcash cryptocurrency and what we call the shielded transactions in Zcash. So just, I guess, a quick recap is prior to the sapling network upgrade, the use of shielded transactions were extremely resource intensive, so they're basically impossible to do on a mobile device. So the launch of Zcash, all of the mobile apps that integrated, like the multi-cryptocurrency apps, were only integrating these transparent addresses, which are essentially like Bitcoin, which isn't to say are bad. They're a good way to like kind of bridge the system into the shielded addresses and give people a way to use Zcash on their phones. But, the end goal is privacy. So sapling was a significant step to making that a lot less resource intensive for mobile phones. And one thing that has come out of that is the mobile reference wallet. So there's been a team at the Electric Coin Company specifically focused on building out libraries which enable other wallets to implement shielded addresses and transactions on mobile phones.
We're using it too, so thanks to the development team for that.
I can't wait until it's out.
It's going to be pretty soon already, because we have been very interested in shielded addresses. We have been working with Zcash for a while now, so
right. Yeah, you were in the foundation grants.
We were one of them, and it would be great to actually make it work on a mobile device, and I think that shielded is a very big part of Zcash generally, and a big part of cryptocurrency this brings the privacy into it, because transparent addresses are great, sure, but having that shielded part unlocked to our users is very important for us right now, and it would be really truly a great feature. That's actually why I wanted you to probably talk a little bit about that, to make it kind of like this smooth passage to getting it released on Guarda.
I'm particularly excited about seeing, because Guarda has kind of run with it, and we're doing a little bit internally, talking with other developers to see where we can help and what feedback that they can already provide us to make the libraries even better. I think there's probably going to be, at the end of the year, some sort of, like, maybe not explosion, but like a good increase of once the libraries have been improved and, due to feedback from you guys and other developers, it'll be significantly easier to implement, and we're really excited about helping anyone really at this point. See if they're interested, they can reach out. And one of the things I've noticed was on our community chat, some of your developers have reached out there to ask for questions. So if people want to reach out on our community chat, we're available there for sure.
You have a very, very vivid and active community. Is it kind of like a special feature probably of Zcash too, because you guys are super active yourselves, always pretty much on your community chats and on the social networks. It's always some kind of action in there. So is it kind of like, does it come naturally, or like you guys put really focus into communication?
I think it's more of a natural thing. We would like to see a broader um, interest from broader regions and things like that. That's something that we're focusing on going forward a little bit. But yeah, I would say that there is no real, like, we haven't really pushed this, like, any artificial community thing at all. A lot of, like, the Rocket Chat system isn't even operated by the Electric Coin Company. That was started by an early community member that wanted to see, something available, and then the Zcash forums. Those are operated by the foundation. So we see a bunch of different people. I would say, yeah, it is pretty natural. Like, you get people from all across the spectrum, from developers and scientists interested in the ZK snarks and just learning more about that side of things, to investors and speculators just trolling each other about the price or something.
You cannot
like
live
that.
without those. So
yeah,
it brings some kind of life as well. This is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
People are different, so this is a great
Not at all. Yeah,
great thing.
The ecosystem is important for everyone. As much as we're focused on this idea of economic freedom, the traders are necessary for liquidity and exchanges and things like that. So it's all one. It all works together.
So moving on the topic of community and probably widespreadness and so on, it's impossible to have any kind of cryptocurrency interview with not mentioning the adoption and the future plans.
Sure.
You guys are working pretty actively with wallets, with exchanges, so it's very developed, I would say. But are there any plans, probably something big that we can expect from Zcash from the point of adoption, from the point of future?
Yeah, so adoption is probably the primary thing that we're actively working on right now, especially because of the reference wallet team, and getting the shielded address adoption is, I think, a pretty obvious focus point for us right now. But scaling is definitely on our minds. We don't have concrete plans. Like, we need to do some research first, basically. But the plan to research is on the roadmap. So, and with that said, we're actually kind of deliberating internally right now, what we can release as a longer term roadmap. So that should be coming out in the near future. Scaling is a part of that. Just pushing adoption of shielded addresses is a forever goal, I think, because
that's a good goal, though.
Yeah, also kind of aligned with that is doing a lot of the education, because especially with regulatory bodies, Zcash is actually, kind of driving, pioneering a lot of the discussions, and getting adopted on regulated exchanges like Coinbase and Gemini. So we're kind of pioneering a lot of these discussions and making different regulatory and policy folks comfortable with the idea of privacy, and making them understand that it's actually, it's necessary. Privacy is necessary to protect consumers. So continuing that education and helping them understand, and building the tools that allow for personally decision-based auditing. So if you want to be able to give someone a key, for example, that allows them to view transaction details, that should be possible. It shouldn't be all or nothing. You should have that in between. So looking at the technologies and developments that would enable more granular giving access to third parties to view transactions for various needs. That's even kind of like a basic business need as well. So looking at that stuff as well.
This is kind of a more long-term goals. But actually, you have said that you definitely have some kind of short-term things planned on your roadmap, but you don't exactly have any like long-term goals, any long-term roadmap, do you?
Not yet, but I think the plan is to release something in the very near future that's about a 2-year roadmap. Obviously, things could change over those 2 years, but it would be kind of a overview of things that we think we can accomplish as the electric coin company, and that's considering the electric coin company as one body. So hopefully other organizations, like as the foundation ramps up, they can have their own areas of focus. One thing, for example, that the foundation is sponsoring is multi-sig research for shielded addresses. So that's one of the things that's missing. That's kind of a basic thing that a lot of people use in Bitcoin that would drive adoption a lot more, is people being able to do multi-sig with these shielded addresses.
Yeah, it's a great thing to have, sure. But I was going to ask something about the education on privacy also, because this is a notion that many people are still not very comfortable with, probably. And sure, all people say that they value privacy a lot. But when it comes to other people's privacy, sometimes there can
Sure.
be some sorts of misunderstanding. So, do you have some kind of a particular plan on how to drive this educational project? Probably, are you planning to do some kind of particular things, or just try to like reach them all, go to some conferences? I don't know, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on who you're talking to. For just a basic user, understanding that in technology, there needs to be these basic privacy protections. And it's realized pretty quickly on, too, in the development of the technology. So at the beginning of the web, people were logging into things just over plain HTTP, and then quickly realized that it was probably necessary to have some private layer to protect the communication. And at this point, HTTPS is widely adopted and even enforced in browsers. So it's kind of like it's a very basic concept that you don't really think about, and maybe you shouldn't even need to think about, but it's something that is kind of necessary at one of the bottom layers. It's not something that you should really add on top. It's something that should come with the technology.
But what about the institutions, like the bigger things, not just the users? Because for users, yeah, it's if it's understood correctly, if it's explained correctly, then people start to know that this is necessary, this is good for them. Like this is a great example with HTTPS, because you don't really think about it, but then when you start analyzing, you're like, oh, actually, probably I really need it. But if you're talking scalability, if you're talking adoption, this should be some kind of like a higher, probably company level, probably institutional level that could be harder to reach from the point of cryptocurrency, talking privacy, and all those things. They're still kind of like in the shadows, unfortunately, probably.
Well, yeah, I think from an organizational point of view, doing business is a basic thing. People have competitors in business, and they want to be able to protect sources and things like that. There's the very basic elements of business needs for protecting your assets and things like that. With regards to regulation and regulatory and policy, I think it really comes down to protecting the consumers. It's not, and particularly the people within their jurisdiction. So, if, for example, someone is using Bitcoin, their transactions are public to everyone. If they're a U.S. Resident or U.S. citizen, I should say, that also means that, the Chinese government can also see those transactions. So if you have privacy, then there's more granularity in what um, jurisdictions can see what. So if you're a U.S. resident, U.S. citizen, and using Gemini is a regulated exchange. They're going to need some basic know your customer stuff. So you can kind of trust that you would have the U.S. government would have access to that information, but not these other potentially problematic jurisdictions or regions.
But is it possible to solve this issue, to think about at least solving this issue with Zcash?
Yeah, so there's kind of been this long flaunted feature called viewing keys, which it is possible to build. It's just a bunch of other things have kind of got prioritized ahead of it due to reasons. But one of the things is being able to with cryptocurrencies you have a spending key and a viewing and a address. So you use the address to receive the funds and use the spending key to send the funds. With Zcash, you can also have a viewing key, which can't spend, but you can see the transactions. So it's kind of this in the middle, or it's a spending key, but it's a private key without the spending capabilities.
Okay.
So if you think about how that might be integrated, you would be able to give a third party access to view transactions without them having the capability to spend. And that's kind of on an address level. There's also just this general selective disclosure concept that is used within Zcash communications, which essentially means just being able to selectively disclose either address-based information or maybe even specifically transaction-based information. So you just disclose a specific transaction with this specific key that only decrypts that one transaction. It's
basically a part of wallet, a part of a transaction process. So like the user will give their consent to use the viewer's key. So
the viewing key or any of these kind of sub keys would be derived from that spending key. So only the person with the original spending key would be able to give that away. They're in ultimate control of it. So it's in their hands. And the way that would be implemented into using more regulation-based services, they would want to require some sort of access to being able to view specific transactions. They might not want to review all transactions from an address because that could be a different liability problem, but just being able to share certain data.
It's an interesting feature, definitely, and it's a great thing to think about in the future from the point of regulations and things like that. So I was also going to ask you, of course, about cryptocurrency wallets because, I'm speaking on behalf of Guarda here, and Zcash is working with wallets a lot. So I'm pretty sure all the people in Zcash are somehow involved more or less with the work of wallets. And I wanted to ask you in person, what are your criteria to having a good cryptocurrency wallet, and what should it be like? Not necessarily for Zcash, it's just your personal opinion on what the perfect wallet should be.
I would say I guess it depends on what I'm doing with it. So if it's a spending wallet, if it's something, if there's a bunch of businesses around me that accept cryptocurrency, then obviously I would want something mobile, and I would want something that is controlled by me, but with an easy way to back up the private keys and everything like that. Make that, even though I'm aware of that concept, most people aren't aware of backing up keys. So I think that's a really important basic feature that needs to be enforced somehow that's as friendly as possible to the user. I do think that and this is kind of based on a lot of what the Zcash reference wallets UX team has done in terms of research, but they actually did a lot of research with people that aren't familiar with cryptocurrencies, and I think there was a lot of confusion around the confirmations, so making clear how many confirmations is safe, and like having it reflect sort of what people are used to with credit card spending. So having a pending transaction, I think, is a familiar concept to people. So implementing ways to show this, like, it's not like maybe it's been confirmed once, but maybe that's not good enough. So we want to wait a little longer, and then reaching a state of like finalized that you can be 99.9% confident that it won't get rolled back or won't have any issues with it. So having that confidence, I think, is important, because I don't know, if you've used cryptocurrency, and most people have used cryptocurrency, there's always been that point when sending a transaction that you're nervous that it actually worked, and same with receiving. So I think that area, that even though there's still this kind of like in-between state until you get a few confirmations for it to be settled, I think that is an area of focus that needs to be really focused on, so people have that confidence that they don't need to like sit and stare at their wallet for 10 minutes to make sure that everything is okay.
Actually, it's a great point, because when I ask this question, usually people start talking about security, about like hardware wallets versus hot wallets versus other like paper wallets, whatever can it be. But actually, from the point of just like simplicity and how logical your wallet is, you rarely hear it, and it's a great point. Because like we try to make our wallet as user friendly as it can be, because like to have close to zero of questions of I don't understand how it works, and this is really a thing that should be featured in researches, because you said that you guys did the research on how people comprehend it actually, and really I'm very surprised and happy to hear a thing about actually a wallet being logical during this question.
Logical in the user experience, so that the bumps, because there's so many bumps still and obstacles of sending money through as cryptocurrency. Another cool thing that they found out through research was the long addresses. Like, all addresses are super long and hard. Obviously, you can't memorize any of them, but doing something as simple as breaking them up into sets of characters, so that people can visualize chunks of characters and quickly verify that first four set of characters are matching. Like if you're comparing two addresses, for example, and trying to make sure they match, you can do that a lot more quickly if the characters are separated out. So things like that. I always got really stressed out.
Think about it.
Yeah, think about it. If you thinking about like sending and like double checking the addresses, you probably go to the first few characters, you go to the last few characters, and then you question yourself a little bit, and you might check
where have I been in the middle?
Yeah. So if you have them spaced out into like four characters or 6 characters or something, then it's a lot quicker for people to do.
This is great to have interviews. You have lots of useful information, not only for the users to educate themselves, but also for us.
all of that research is available from the user research team here. So people should definitely, if they want to learn more about what the user research team have figured out by doing these tests, they should reach out for sure.
And also, in the way somewhere, because like it's been a very long answer with lots of information that's been really useful, but you mentioned with the businesses accepting cryptocurrency, and this is definitely one of the things that drives scale and drives this whole general crypto adoption. So Zcash team been working with like getting Zcash as a payment method?
So I wouldn't say the electric coin company has put a lot of focus on it because we're just so focused on the infrastructure and enabling other people to do that. That said, the greater ecosystem has been working on this, particularly the Zcash Foundation awarded a grant to a company called AnyPay to build in shielded addresses into their payment processing service. So, and I think the UI is basically just an app that merchants can install, and they support other cryptocurrencies too. But it's kind of the first in class to support shielded address acceptance, and so that is definitely ramping up. I would say there is focus on it. It's just kind of been slower than a lot of the other more core improvements that have needed to happen. Obviously, like if like Zcash is more adopted and we do run into a scaling problem, that's kind of a good problem to have. But we also do want to focus on making sure it's ready too. So, a lot of that specialized payment processing stuff, we're hoping other companies kind of spearhead that and let us know if there's any improvements that can be made with regards to that, because they'll probably learn a lot about using private addresses in that context that we haven't understood yet, and that could be improved by fixing the protocol or something. So,
Okay, that's great. And I have a last question for you because we're kind of out of time in here, but I would like you probably to elaborate a little bit on general crypto development and like where do you see us all in like 3 to 5 years?
3 to 5 years. Well, I think I can see a little bit. So obviously we've had this kind of bear market and slowing down of the overexcitement, I guess you could call it, in the last year or 2 years, which I think is a healthy thing for the industry as a whole. You're getting more serious players, and you're seeing the ones that have been able to survive, that have made plans to anticipate such a market, be able to sustain themselves going forward. So I think going forward, we'll see a lot of the more serious companies and businesses being built kind of take the lead. I would like to see, a lot of the attention be given towards a lot of the new innovations that are happening. So I think it's great, for example, that Zcash isn't the only cryptocurrency that focuses on privacy, that there are other research teams. The Monero research team is great. Like they've come up with a lot of cool things. So having kind of research from competing teams, so to say, I think it's going to drive us really far so that everyone will benefit. And all of this research is public. So, Zcash or Monero can adopt each other's ideas, and I think it's going to benefit us a lot. I think hopefully we'll be in a better spot with regards to scaling. There's a lot of options out there, and maybe layer 2 will be in a lot kind of more steady states, and people will have a lot more understanding of how it works compared to just layer 1, and how any problems that have arisen out of it over the last year or so have been kind of coming to resolution. So I see, I guess, like, to sum all that up, I see like a hardening sort of the industry, so that we have more standards and clearer paths to move forward. I don't think we're going to see like major adoption until a little further than that, I guess. So yeah, I think 3 to 5 years it'll be just a little more stable with regards to the technology and the understanding.
Oh, this is a pretty exciting plan to have, and I think it's a good thing that you think about it as a community hardening probably and like more mature generally
Yeah,
space.
yeah,
And personally, I'm excited to see Zcash in 3 to 5 years. Equally
yeah.
excited to see Guarda because
Who knows?
who
Yeah.
knows, this is a very, very rapidly changing world. And
Yes.
in the short term, we will have the shielded transactions, which will be
Yes.
great. You know, the chance to work with your community and your developers and generally Zcash, which is always exciting for us. And of
Yeah.
course, it's great to have you on our cryptocurrency awareness project. And I hope that probably we'll make something up in the future too. For example, when we roll out Shielded, and
Yes, definitely.
probably tell
Always reach
more.
out. I mean, if Garda is one of the first wallets, there's going to be a lot. You're going to learn a lot about shielded addresses from users. So there's going to need to be kind of this constant communication. Um, so we're looking forward to it, definitely.
Us too. And thank you very much, Paige. It was lovely
You're
having
welcome.
you with us, and really looking forward for this interview to get published.
Me as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.